Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to take a very brief couple of minutes to say a little bit about our Centenary touring exhibition, which is advanced now in its development. It's due, as Dennis has already said, to open at the Shrine on the 4th of August this year, and the first of the venues in the regional tour, which will be over 4.5 years, is Bairnsdale. So I'm not going to try to give too much away here. But just a few tasters of the sorts of things that are in there. It's an exhibition which is a chronology of the First World War, looking at the events of the front line and also the home front, and in some ways the dialogue between the two, because what was happening on the home front influenced the men at the front line, and what was happening on the front line most definitely influenced what people thought and felt and did on the home front. There's an emphasis throughout on Victorian stories. There will be occasionally stepping outside of that, but we will be looking at the bigger picture stories of the war with emphasis on how Victorian units participated and individual stories of Victorians that were swept up in those events. The first image I'm showing you is by Walter Cass, who led some of the 2nd Division at Krithia at Gallipoli, later fought at Fromelles and was wounded there before he retired from action. I've shown you this one, well, firstly because I think it's delightful and it gives you some indication of the sort of enthusiasm that existed for the war, particularly in the early days. This is a train decorated as part of a recruitment campaign, and this is in Broadmeadows. And also to illustrate the fact that we're drawing things for this exhibition from many sources, of course the big archives like the War Memorial and the State Library, but a number of really interesting individual photographers, and Cass is one of them, feature, and they keep coming back into our focus. So I'm almost thinking we need to find the families of these people and make sure they're there in some form at a preview or at the launch of the exhibitions at the Shrine, and also this to understand what it has meant to us to discover their own perspectives on the war. This is the landing on an incident of the landing on the first day. In addition to photographs, I'll come back to that image in a minute, we'll have a number of audiovisuals. We're working on a fairly major one for the galleries to help interpret the boat, and as Dennis has said, focused very much on the first day, on using accounts from people who were there, and I want to get as broad a range of accounts as I can, whether it's nurses trying to cope with the impossibly inadequate preparations for dealing with wounded and dying, or men themselves throughout that first 24 hours, or commanders, whether Australian or British, and also journalists, of course. So to try to build up a picture in that audiovisual of how they saw that first day, but also what came out of their accounts in terms of how we've adopted them and our understanding of that day into our mythology. This next image is of a cartoon in 1916. This is as manpower shortages have become really quite pronounced, and this is commenting on a returned serviceman looking for work and discovering that there are vacancies for female clerks. So the society at home has become very complex and far less as one, perhaps, on the subject of the war, and what has brought that about particularly is manpower shortages and conscription, and the conscription debate will of course be dealt with in the exhibition. This image I like. It's one, I suppose, that's rare where the men are all looking at the camera. It's taken at the end of 1916 and it gives a pretty good idea of how rugged things had become. Just an example of one of the many that we've got. In addition to the Gallipoli First Day audiovisual, which will be adapted, of course, for the touring exhibition, the other major audiovisual component will be an interactive in which we'll show a collation of stories, both community and family and individual stories, from towns around Victoria. And the hope is that people will be able to type in the name of their town, and within a certain radius there will be stories, one or several, from that region. That gives rise to the thought that we would like to understand what stories people have themselves, and we haven't resolved at all yet how we'll do it, but we would like to think there will be a way of collating the stories that we come to learn about as we take the exhibition around the state. We'll be engaging with RSLs and local historical societies and other community groups often months out before we take the exhibition into a community, into their local venue, to find out what stories there are. Now, we're aware that if there's a regional gallery, they're more than likely already planning an exhibition of their own. and we would very much like to have our exhibition sitting alongside theirs. But equally, we may incorporate into this exhibition, in display cases that will provide stories from local families and local organisations, or help them to do something slightly more ambitious than that, that would sit alongside our exhibition. We've done that very successfully with both of our previous touring exhibitions, particularly. I think we've got a little bit better at making those connections as we've gone along and incorporating those into our exhibitions. This image here is one I particularly like and hadn't seen until recently. That's taken in Ypres in 1917 during the Third Battle of Ypres. And it's a lot of allies behind the lines, in particular Australians. And of course, we will not be forgetting the costs of the war. And this is one of many stories of a young man who came back so seriously wounded that he didn't ever really emerge from hospital again. He was there in hospital for some years, but never to lead a normal, healthy life again. So there's just a few final ones to give you a flavour. The woman there is knitting socks. The effort on the home front of developing comforts for the troops at the front line was enormous, and one of the important ways of reminding people at the front line that they hadn't been forgotten and there was a great deal of concern for them at home. So to date, we've confirmed 16 venues throughout Victoria, which are here. I won't read them out. We've got another 8 or so that we're working on. I would just conclude by saying we're really committed to getting our touring exhibitions to as many different sorts of venues as we can. Initially, the regional galleries tended not to see our exhibitions as being appropriate for an art gallery, but that seemed to change with the Indigenous touring exhibition, and we've got a number who are already taking this one. So it's good to see them embracing more historical exhibitions. But when I say we're keen to take this exhibition to a range of venues, we're not precious about going to a town hall. The main thing is that we've got somewhere to hang the images and to mount our audio visuals. And I think, lastly, I'd just say this is probably certainly the biggest of the touring exhibitions we've done, and I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.